Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights. And I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also comment in the comment section with anything you would like to add. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics in astrology. You can email me at the email address in the video description, and I can send you a full pricing list and further details. Also, I have started memberships on this channel, which entail 4 extra videos per month for the members only area. That's 2 for 1 level of membership and 4 for the second and highest level of membership. And I have a short video where I go into more details about the memberships and what they entail, the kind of content that I will be posting. And you can find that in the video description as well if you are interested in finding out more about it. And also, last but not least, I have a tarot channel, and I will be linking it in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. And I also do private tarot readings in case you're curious. You can also email me at the email address in the video description. In any case, go ahead and check out my tarot channel. If you like tarot, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. All right, so today's topic is going to be on something that I have been thinking about a lot in recent history. It's really weird because I have sort of vaguely touched upon these aspects in Synastry before, but I don't think I'm pretty sure that I haven't done a video specifically about this aspect in Synastry. And I'm talking about the Mars-Pluto aspects in Synastry. And mainly, I'm going to be talking about inter-aspects, but I'm going to be touching a little bit on the composite situation. And really, I want to break down the psychology of these aspects, all right? And some common themes that I have noticed through reading a lot of charts, analyzing Synastry over the years. The kind of struggles that this aspect brings, this Mars-Pluto contact can bring. I have also kind of touched upon it when it comes to its negative expression in a video that I will be linking in the video description, where I talked about narcissistic abuse. And one of the dark sides of the Mars-Pluto aspect is just that. It's abuse, unfortunately. So I will be getting more in depth about that as I go along. However, I also want to focus on the potentially positive aspect of these contacts. And so let me get straight into it. So first of all, you know that mostly I focus on Vedic astrology. I mean, those of you who are on this channel for a while, you know that I focus mostly on Vedic astrology. And Vedic astrology does not take Pluto into account. It's one of the outer planets. I'm sure that there are some, Vedic astrologers out there. I know especially the ones who use the tropical zodiac, like I know that Lada Dancheva is one of them, and Ernst Wilhelm. I'm pretty sure that they use Pluto. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, I'm sure that there are also some, people who are into traditional Vedic astrology and they also use Pluto, but most of them don't. It is not taken into account. It's not one of the Karakas, which are the planets from Sun to Saturn, and there are 7 of them. So Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. I'm pretty sure that I covered all of them. Those are the Karakas, or the planets, according to traditional Vedic astrology. So they don't take into account Uranus, they don't take into account Neptune, or Pluto, or any of the asteroids. They do, however, take into account the North Node, which is called Rahu, and the South Node, which is called Ketu. This is just a short introduction for people who maybe just, wandered into this video without knowing much about Vedic astrology. In any case, Pluto, I do take it into account, and I have mentioned it in many videos, just as the one as I will be linking in the description, because I've just noticed through practical application, through a lot of readings, that it does bring very useful insights into understanding, both in relationships as well as in personal natal astrology. But as usual, when it comes to astrology in general, it is the most obvious in relationships. With Pluto especially, you can really see its work in synastry. And the reason you can tell that it's definitely from Pluto and not other aspects is because often, even when there couldn't be anything that could explain that particular kind of energy that the Pluto conjures in synastry, right? You get those energies, and basically it's an unmistakable energy that you couldn't possibly attribute to some other planetary combination. And the unmistakable nature that I'm talking about has to do with psychology. As you know, in tropical astrology, you may or may not know, Pluto is considered to be the basically main ruler of the sign of Scorpio, together with Mars. That's not the same as it is in Vedic astrology. In Vedic astrology, Scorpio is ruled by Mars and the South Node, or Ketu as it is known. However, interestingly enough, Pluto does seem to have kind of that energy. I can see why Pluto is being associated with the sign of Scorpio, but I would say, if anything, it's even darker than the traditional scorpionic energy, at least when it comes to its expression, yes, within synastry. And I'm also going to get into some examples of famous couples at the end to give you practical illustration of what I'm talking about. But Pluto has to do with psychology, all right? Pluto has to do with the ability to manipulate. It has to do with 8th house scorpionic themes. It has very similar energies to that, all right? It may not be 100% the same as the Scorpio energy in Vedic astrology, but it is closest to that energy. It's the best way that I could explain it. It's if anything, I would call it kind of like a combination between Scorpio and Capricorn, because it's about obsession, it's about fixations, but it's also about issues like control and manipulation and, things that kind of seem a little bit Saturnian in energy. And it's a pretty dark energy. It's not a soft side of a person's psyche. It has to do with the hunger for power, for control, and it also shows deeply rooted fears. Again, this is why I also feel like it's best explained as a combination between Scorpio and Capricorn. Because, again, you may have heard me say this in other videos, that Saturn is very much connected to fear. If out of all of the planets, I would say Saturn is very much about fear. The one that is the most about the energy of fear. And that's where Saturn's desire to control comes from. I also talked about this in a video I did on Ketu called Archetypes of Ketu, that basically, I think, at least, at the root of Scorpio's desire for power and control and research. This is why Scorpio is most connected to research, and Ketu as well in Vedic astrology is very much connected to research, getting at the bottom of things. The reason they have this drive, the reason that Scorpio is connected to this drive, is because of fear. It's because human beings have this deeply rooted fear that they're going to be overpowered by something, that they're going to lose control, or something else is going to control them. And that's where this desire comes from, to constantly break things down and research and get to the bottom of things, and, psychology and all this is because, there's this drive, this idea that once we know enough, we're going to be able to control everything. And when I say we, remember that these are archetypes and they are present within all of us to some extent. And that's why I say we, because there are general energies, as opposed to, try not to over-identify with any particular energy, and don't just think that, well, this person's Plutonian, so this is how they're going to be, and, so on and so forth, because everyone is a combination a kaleidoscope. Kaleidoscope? How do you call it? Like, it's, I don't know, a disco ball of different colored lights and energies, right? That's what each person's horoscope looks like. And, yeah, but I digress. Going back to the idea of Pluto, these are the main energies. So a combination of Scorpio and Capricorn. That's the easiest way that I can put it. And Pluto is at its core about insecurities, fears, and from that fear comes a very intense desire for control, for possession, also obsession. Like, Pluto has this kind of energy that is typical scorpionic, yeah, in the sense that they want to research, like, for instance, in Synastry, you see this where let's say if your Pluto hits someone else's planet, you feel drawn to that person and you want to basically dig through their psyche because you want to get to the bottom of who they are and understand them. And unfortunately, the root of this desire to understand this person is because you want to control them, because you want to break them down, even worst case scenario, depending on the nature of the aspect and what else is going on there. And actually, the healthier the person is, the less likely they are to take the worst, route when it comes to expressing the Plutonian energy. And again, I'm going to get more into this as I go into the examples. But this is pretty much Pluto in a nutshell. It's fears. It's like a part of you that's actually quite small and vulnerable, but tries to compensate by manipulation, by research, by mind games. This is why Scorpio is also connected to psychology, as I was saying. So it's a pretty nasty sort of energy, and it's not soft, even though the sign of Scorpio is seen as a feminine sign. Not even Pluto, not even Mars, not even, Ketu, the South Node, are actual feminine energies. Pluto is, I would say, a typically masculine energy. In the sense that, again, it's not about vulnerability. It's not about showing any vulnerability. They have a sensitivity, but they keep it buried under, a facade of toughness and wanting to achieve and, being strong and all this stuff. So they don't ever show like softness, vulnerability, not even empathy a lot of the times. Like Scorpio in its worst expression is known for basically using knowledge, using something that, is called in psychology basically cold reading, which is like understanding a person without really empathizing with them, just reading their behavior in order to understand how they might react in certain circumstances. And on the surface, you are capable of mimicking empathy by doing this kind of thing. However, it's not real empathy. It's just a desire to control the person. So yeah, this is Pluto. Then you have Mars on the other hand. Mars is brute force. Mars is the natural ruler of actually both Scorpio, but originally it is the ruler of Aries. And Mars is the warrior/general archetype. This is an energy that is very physical. It's very brutish, very masculine, very go-getter, a kind of go-getter sort of energy. And it's not the kind of energy, again, that is going to be soft or understanding or showing empathy. It's not a compromising energy by any stretch of the imagination. And this is exactly why this aspect is so dangerous, potentially, because both of these planets are planets that signify strong willpower and a strong desire to get their own way by any means necessary. If you've heard that saying, all is fair in love and war, that would definitely apply to, the tactics of a Plutonian or a person who maybe has Mars-Pluto in their natal chart as well. And certainly for some people, this is the kind of attitude that they have in romantic relationships when they have this aspect in Synastry very prominently placed. And yeah, so Mars is a kind of energy that reacts with violence. Mars is not the kind of energy that is going to play along with Pluto. Because Pluto, generally, when it comes to the Mars person, so if one person's Pluto is aspected by another person's Mars, the Pluto person might initially feel intimidated. It's actually similar in a way to the way that the Mars-Saturn aspect works, except it's much more intense and much more messy and much more dangerous. And again, if you're curious about the Mars-Saturn, I have done videos about that, so you can research that on my channel. Maybe I'm going to link it in the video description as well. But in any case, when a person's Pluto is aspected by another person's Mars, they will feel kind of intimidated by the Mars person. They may never admit to this, maybe not even to themselves, but they will feel kind of smaller by comparison. They might feel threatened, more inhibited around the Mars person. And because of this, they will seek to undermine Mars's confidence and drive and ambition. So it's actually a weird combination, again, similarly to the way that Mars-Saturn aspects play out in chart interaspects. The Pluto person is going to feel afraid, really, of the Mars persons. It's like they're a combination of feeling afraid and intimidated on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're in awe, they're in admiration of the Mars person. So they're going to seek to put them down in their typical Plutonian fashion, which is by using all kinds of power plays, manipulations, basically indirect methods of controlling a person. Worst case scenario, this could take the forms of actual psychological abuse, things like gaslighting, I don't know, you name it. Gaslighting, the silent treatment, and of course, worst case scenario, it can turn violent. But when it comes to the turning violent, I have talked about this also when it comes to the gender differences in the video that I will be linking in the video description about narcissistic abuse. That, the gender of the people in question, who is the Mars, who is the Pluto, will also play a factor when you take into account, different social pressures and how men versus women are generally socialized and all this stuff. And I did say there that, for instance, when you have a man with a weak Mars having his Mars conjunct, or especially with a conjunction and opposition, but really any kind of aspect from another woman's Pluto to his Mars could trigger an aggressive reaction, because Mars's default mode is to resort to violence. Mars is an energy like the warrior, like the general. This is an energy of getting things done by any means necessary. So it's not about, it's not going to join Pluto in its little games, basically. So Pluto might try to kind of lure Mars into, manipulations. And for a while, they might even succeed successfully. They might succeed successfully to manipulate the Mars person, especially with the easier aspects, especially where you have the trine, the sextile, and the conjunction to some extent, that might work for a while. But sooner or later, what happens is the Mars person will start to catch on, or they will either catch on or they will just get pissed because Pluto is going to send mixed messages. Mars is not going to be patient to try to understand them, and they're just going to get increasingly more frustrated. They're going to feel like maybe they can't even put their finger on exactly what the Pluto person is doing, but they feel like somehow they're being screwed, pardon my French. Like they're feeling like, the Pluto person is playing games with them, and that's going to trigger an angry reaction. And I also mentioned in that video that specifically, I was going to say this specifically when it comes to the man being the Mars. If a woman's Pluto aspects his Mars and he already has some wounds around his masculinity, maybe his Mars is weak, his sun is weak, all of this stuff, it could bring out really violent reactions, even a tendency towards things like sadism and masochism and all this stuff. like wanting to control women by force, the woman in question, who is very triggering. And I talked about this, and again, I will be getting in more in depth in the examples, where I'm going to mention again Marilyn Manson with the two women who accused him of sexual abuse, who were Esme, Bianco, and Evan Rachel Wood. He has the conjunction between Mars and Pluto with both of them. In each scenario, he in one of the scenarios, he's the Mars, and the other one, he's the Pluto. And with one of them, he has a double whammy, a mutual Mars-Pluto conjunction. Now, but I'm going to get more into that at the end. So, yes, this is one potential expression of the Mars-Pluto. This violence, this Mars being triggered and being violent towards Pluto. And another thing is, both of these planets are connected to sexuality. Pluto is naturally associated to, like I said, to Scorpio. Scorpio is the sign of sexuality more than any of the other 12 signs. But it's also about that root chakra energy. It's like basal chakra, however you want to call it, root chakra. So it has to deal with that primal sexual energy. Mars, on the other hand, is the same thing. It's very purely connected to sexual energy, and both of these energies are very masculine, intense sort of energies. Pluto may be a little less masculine and maybe a bit more spiritual with respect to their approach to sexuality. They'll be a little bit more, more into tantra and stuff like that. Or they will just, respect sexuality as something having a spiritual dimension, whereas Mars is just, kind of very blunt and treats sexuality like a sport, or it's all about the conquest. That's another way to look at it. So, needless to say that one of the main reasons why these people get together is because of a very, very strong physical attraction. And it's probably going to be mutual, but when it comes to the relationship, the Pluto person usually has the upper hand. At least in the beginning of the relationship, the Pluto person will be the one who is holding the reins, who is kind of manipulating the Mars person. Because the Mars person, again, being more blunt and more undiplomatic, is generally not going to have either the inclination or the ability to spot the machinations of Pluto. And, because if they did, once they do, they generally confront the Pluto person, and it's not going to be pretty. But the Mars person can generally be blind to how the Pluto person can manipulate them. And the attraction is, very intense, mutual, but neither of them really voices how much they are attracted to the other person. It's like this constant tug of war between who has the upper hand in the relationship. And you see this with all of them, actually. All of the contacts between Mars and Pluto are like this. Of course, the more intense they are, especially with the conjunction and the opposition, and also the tighter the orb is of the aspect, so if it's like Mars in 0 degree Aries and Pluto is in 3 degree Aries, that's a less than 3 degree conjunction, right? So that's a really intense conjunction. But as you know, in Vedic astrology, as long as two planets are in the same sign, that still counts as a conjunction. So, and if two planets are in the opposite signs, that still counts as an opposition. However, the stronger the aspect, as in the tighter the orb is, the stronger, the more intense it will be felt. And also the more unconscious it will become in the people's, psyches. Meaning they will be really unconscious about how they're being affected by this aspect. So, the tighter it is, the more likely it is that something's going to go wrong. They might be triggered by one another. They might become aggressive towards one another. And, that's pretty much how it plays out. Now, the reason, like I said, the main reason why people are drawn to this is because of the physical attraction. And here's where I'm going to be talking about the positives versus the negatives. Now, I will start by saying that honestly, in most situations, and you will see this from the examples, these aspects do not make for a stable relationship unless there are a lot of other positive aspects that counterbalance this placement in Synastry. So if you have a lot of Saturn positive aspects or a lot of the traditional aspects that you would expect to see in Synastry that show mutual attraction and harmony, and even in those situations, having a Mars-Pluto can really test the connection because it's a very intense energy. It requires a lot of patience, a lot of mutual respect in order to navigate this relationship, and also a lot of self-awareness, which unfortunately most people don't have. Yes, even though we are in the 21st century. And I've actually said this in multiple videos. The more people don't care about astrology, the more likely they are to play out their charts exactly the way that they are. So in other words, like if a person has never analyzed their horoscope and they, let's say, meet someone that they have a Mars-Pluto conjunction with, they might feel a very strong compulsive attraction towards this person, but they won't be able to understand why and where it's coming from and whether it's coming from a healthy place or not a healthy place, right? So the healthy expression of this aspect, because there are healthy expressions, there are positives to any aspect. The best case scenario with a Mars-Pluto is a purging of energies. This can be a very kind of regenerating relationship where both people heal one another, especially when it comes to their sexuality, maybe even past traumas, anything that has to do with like root chakra, issues of survival. They might feel stronger together. That's another thing. They could, especially with the conjunction, the trine, and the sextile, which are the more, let's say, unifying aspects. They could feel like they're making a team against the world and that they are protected within their relationship. And that's another thing with these aspects. You often see people in relationships being very private about their, relationship, about what's going on between the two of them. Yeah, because Pluto is about control and Pluto is about secrecy as well. So, yeah. Another thing that I wanted to say is, with the positive, is both of you can cultivate physical resilience. Like, for instance, if you have lower energy individually, if you have, let's say, the conjunction, you might feel you get a boost of energy in this relationship. You get stronger regenerating powers with respect to dealing with illnesses or accidents or any physical challenge. You become stronger together. And this is especially true if you have it in the composite chart. But even in, Synastry, as in chart interaspects, you can still see this playing out. And yeah, so these are basically the main positives, right? The best case scenario, again, I stress this, implies that the two people are aware of their tendencies, right? So they will prevent themselves from playing power games, from, playing with each other's feelings. They won't do these kinds of, that's the ideal scenario, but unfortunately in real life, oftentimes that's not the case, right? Because a lot of people, like I said, are very unconscious. So yes, best case scenario, you could look into things like, tantric sex or whatever. You could have a very healing relationship, like I said. And, you can also really understand one another better, get down to the core of one another psychologically, so it can be like a purging sort of relationship. If there are any issues that have been plaguing you in your existence and you have, let's say, a Mars-Pluto conjunction in Synastry, you can really heal these energies with all the stuff that is connected with them in your horoscope. So it's very, very regenerating and healthy in many ways, even if still it can be challenging and painful. The whole process is kind of like cleaning out a cavity or something. Or even something much more visceral than that, honestly. getting a root canal. I don't know. But yeah, these are the best case scenarios, all right? Transformation. You could literally, again, that's another thing. You see this in relationships where they'll say things like, this person changed my life, or this relationship has changed my life, or I'm never going to be able to forget this person. I was actually really laughing about this because I remembered I came across this article ages ago when I was reading, tropical astrology. There was this article about Mars-Pluto aspects, and this woman said something about a guy who was in a relationship with a woman that he had Mars-Pluto aspects with in Synastry, and he got her name tattooed on his face. And then he was stuck with the tattoo on his face even after they broke up. So, yeah, this is a good... And I really laughed about this, actually, because when I was doing some research, I found out that Wynona Ryder and Johnny Depp had this aspect. And when they were together, Johnny Depp had her name tattooed on his arm. And then when they broke up, he had it changed. Instead of he had, like, Wynona Forever tattooed, and then he changed it to Wino Forever because they broke up. In any case, really funny. I mean, this is kind of like also a warning, don't get someone's name tattooed on your face when you are in the haze of Plutonian Mars-Pluto infatuation and passion, because, you never know what's gonna happen in the future. But yes, this is one thing. So this could be very transforming. It can be, yes, life-changing, and it definitely leaves a mark. That's another thing. Sometimes literally, right? If you go for tattoos and stuff. But the negative, like I said, you mostly see the negatives where the person, the negatives as in the negative expression of this aspect. You mostly see that where one or two people, or one or both people in the relationship have damaged planets in their horoscopes. So let me give you an example. Because this tendency is about, this aspect is about control, and it's about sexuality, and it's really a kind of basic sexuality. So it's not, it's not like about romance at all. It's not like, for instance, Mars-Venus aspect or a Pluto-Moon aspect, by the way, which those are also painful. I'm not going to get into that right now. But it's not like that, it's a very intense, physical, passionate aspect. So it's very visceral, very raw, and it's not in any way soft. So if there aren't other aspects in the horoscope, in Synastry, to soften up this energy, it can really take the forms of nasty aggressiveness and things like BDSM and, sadism and masochism and all this stuff. All of these like weird extreme expressions of sexuality. And again, as I was saying, you tend to see this when the person's horoscope is already messed up. So I'm going to talk about, for instance, a little bit about Ike Turner and Marilyn Manson's charts, who had these aspects with the women that they abused in their lives. And that's because in their personal horoscopes, in their natal charts, they had already some signs that they might head down that path towards sadism, masochism, and all that stuff. Right. And so pretty much that's what I wanted to say. It is a really dangerous aspect to have because you never know how it's going to go. Like I said, unless the two people are very mature, very healthy, and they have a lot of supportive aspects in other places in Synastry, this can be a very difficult aspect to have. Although, ironically, you do see it in long-term relationships. I actually have met maybe one or two couples in my life who have had strong Mars-Pluto aspects in, like, Synastry, and especially composite charts. And they're the kind of couples where, first of all, people don't want to mess with them as a couple. That's a good thing. To some extent. But another thing is that people look at them and they're like, how did you two stay together for so long without killing each other? Because they have such a weird twisted interaction. They're rough with one another, or, it's a really kind of messed up energy, honestly. Again, unless there's a lot of softness and a lot of other influences to soften it up. And speaking of the composite, just a couple of words about the composite. Everything that I said about the two people becoming stronger because of this aspect, that's definitely magnified when this aspect is present in the composite chart. So when you have, this is like the positive aspect of having it in the composite chart, which is that you can become a formidable force to be dealt with together as a couple. And this is great, for dealing with all kinds of challenges, and maybe even when worst case scenario, it's a question of survival. You want to see Mars-Pluto in the composite chart. However, when it's a time of peace, and when it comes to diplomacy and harmony and all this stuff, it's not a good aspect to have. Because again, it shows, especially with the hard aspects, the conjunction, the opposition, the square, especially with the square and the opposition, it shows a lot of power struggles. It shows continuous and butting heads, and there's like this fight of who has control over the other person, who's the biggest and the toughest, It's, like I said, not a very soft, gentle energy. So yes, this is pretty much what I wanted to say. So let me get into the examples that I found. First of all, Vivien, Leigh, and Laurence, Olivier, they had the opposition. She had her Mars-Pluto conjunct in Gemini opposite his Mars in Sagittarius. So in this situation, his Mars was also opposing her Mars. So that would definitely also add to the attraction and the push and pull in the relationship. But in any case, they have the opposition between Pluto and Mars, and when you think about it, they have had a very whirlwind, transformative sort of relationship, because when they met, first of all, they were instantly very attracted to one another, and both of them were married, both of them had kids, or at least one kid. I'm not sure if they had more than that. And they decided, they started having an affair, and then eventually decided to break up from their spouses in order to get married. So, and they were also known throughout the main parts of their lives and their careers to be a power couple. And it was definitely, you can say, a transformative aspect to have, in Synastry, because it did turn their lives upside down and left a mark. And I remember, I saw a documentary ages ago about their relationship, and apparently even right before Vivien, Leigh died, Laurence, Olivier, she was very, very much still drawn to him and still wanted a relationship. And even after he heard of her passing, he was very affected, whatever, even though they had had a very painful relationship together from multiple points of view. I also talked about them in the video where I talked about the Saturn-Rahu conjunction, if you're curious to see that. So they had a lot of challenging aspects in Synastry, which makes sense why their relationship ended really badly. I don't know if it was just this aspect in particular. I think it was a combination of different things. All right, the second one is, like I mentioned, also in the earlier part of the video, Wynona Ryder and Johnny Depp. Wynona has Mars in Aquarius. Opposite, again, here you have a double opposition. Johnny Depp's Mars, Pluto in Leo. And this is, again, very interesting because, like I said, not only did he get her name tattooed on his arm, but Wynona Ryder, I read this again in an interview, said that at a later point, much later after they broke up, that he was her first everything, her first lover, her first real boyfriend, her first kiss and everything, and that she was very devastated when they broke up. Apparently, he broke up with her. And she was very devastated, even though he got her name tattooed on his arm. Yeah, talk about fickle. In any case, it was also definitely transformative, a kind of a relationship, because, if it was bad enough that he got her name tattooed on his arm and she said that she was devastated after the breakup and, he was her everything and all that, definitely something that left a very profound mark on the both of them. And, even in that interview that I read, I think even Wynona Ryder said that she will forever have like a soft spot for him or something like that. Like he will always be a part of her life or something like that. Something about forever, whatever. Some like really intense stuff, kind of like that. So yeah, also best case scenario with this aspect, that's another thing that I should have said, is, you know, best case scenario, you will have maybe a mark from one another, or you will have a good, like, powerful memory. Worst case scenario, you will have a scar. So, in any case, moving on to the next example, which is Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. Another example of two people who, of course, had a huge attraction. Again, they were in a relationship. I also used them as well in the as an example in the video where I talked about Rahu conjunct Saturn. So again, if you want to check out about Rahu and Saturn in Synastry, check out that video where I talked about the difficulties that that aspect brings and why a lot of couples with it break up eventually, even though it can also lead to long-term relationships. In any case, parenthesis has been closed. So Angelina Jolie has her Pluto in Virgo square Brad Pitt's Mars in Sagittarius. And, you know, I found this again kind of interesting and in a bittersweet sort of way, because the rumors were that the reason they broke up was because of Brad Pitt's violence towards her and towards one of their children, one or several, I'm not even sure. So that would actually explain the more negative aspect of Pluto and Mars. Now, again, they also have a lot of aspects in Synastry that suggests volatility and high passion. I think they also have the Moon Mars conjunct in composite, so a lot of aspects that can show, you know, emotional outbursts and even potential for violence, unfortunately. And that did play out, I guess, eventually. But I also find it really interesting, and maybe I should have also mentioned this when I did the Synastry. I didn't think about even looking at Pluto in that Synastry, but now that I'm looking at it, you know, in retrospect, it kind of makes sense that, you know, I mean, let me not be mean. I don't know if it makes sense or not, but the fact that her Pluto is square his Mars kind of shows that she was maybe, you know, using manipulation on him, and he eventually caught on or something, especially since, you know, this is a very physical aspect. It's not excluded that one, or usually the Pluto person, but sometimes the other person, can use sexuality to, you know, manipulate the other person to gain the results that they want, the control they want, and all that. All right, we'll get into details. And now this is where the dark side starts, where, like I said in the video, Marilyn Manson and Evan Rachel Wood. Now, if you maybe haven't heard about this, Evan Rachel Wood and Esme Bianco, and I think maybe other women as well, have accused Marilyn Manson of pretty serious things. Stuff like basically sadism and tying them up and like raping them and stuff like that. I don't know if it was like that bad, but something along those lines, like basically sexual abuse, all right, involving things that were pretty weird, like BDSM stuff. And of course, Manson denied the allegations and said that everything was consensual and whatever. But I refuse to believe that these women just made stuff up. I don't believe that. And if anything, if you look at this Synastry, you can kind of see where it comes from, because like I said, so he has the conjunction between Mars and Pluto with each of these women. So Evan Rachel Wood has her Pluto in Libra conjunct his Mars in Libra, and Esme Bianco has Pluto in Libra conjunct his Mars in Libra, and she also has her Mars in Virgo conjunct his Pluto in Virgo. So that's a double whammy, which means very likely they also have the conjunction in the composite chart. So that's a lot of Plutonian energy surrounding these issues, these energies of sexuality. And the reason I say, you know, you gotta check the natal chart to see if this could turn potentially violent. In Manson's chart, it's actually difficult to see initially, but Mars is in Libra. It's not a very strong Mars, to be honest, and also in Swati Nakshatra, which is a very sexual nakshatra. It's very connected to sexuality, and I've actually seen a lot of Swati people who have a tendency towards promiscuity, but not that, promiscuity and BDSM are not the same thing. But you can expect the Swati individual to be, hypersexual, and that can take all kinds of forms. And all right, so Mars in Libra and or Swati wouldn't be enough for Manson to just have a tendency towards dark sexual expressions, but he also has Venus in Satabishak Nakshatra in the 8th house. Now, the reason I stress Satabishak Nakshatra is because this is a really painful placement for Venus. So it can show a lot of traumas, it can show a lot of suffering, a lot of maybe unrequited love, maybe even a slight touch of hatred towards women because of frustrations that he may have come across in his existence. And in the 8th house, 8th house is a placement that for Venus especially is not the happiest. It's the house of Mars, which is an enemy placement, and Venus is not very comfortable there. So, and again, the 8th house has that plutonic, scorpionic sort of energy of taking things to an extreme, and things like BDSM and all this sadomasochism stuff, that's definitely something you would expect to see from someone who has prominent 8th house. And I would say his Venus, in other words, is quite damaged, and this is not uncommon. You're going to see this when I get to the next example, where it's not uncommon to see very damaged Venus, very damaged Mars with men who become abusive, especially Venus, because Venus is the ability to love, and it's about tenderness and sweetness and all that. And if Venus is very defeated, very affected, very afflicted, it shows that the person is not very good at getting in touch with that soft, gentle, loving nature. And in fact, quite the contrary, Venus can become, everything that Venus stands for can become really tarnished and even perverted, right? So to some extent, I think that this is what happened in Manson's chart. Now, I haven't looked more in depth into his divisional charts, for instance. Maybe there's more there that would explain violent tendencies. But moving on to Tina Turner and Ike Turner. Now, first of all, may she rest in peace. And obviously, this was an example that actually I have thought about recently because I heard about her passing, which was very sad to me. I grew up in the 90s, and Tina Turner was at the height of her fame, or, maybe not at the height of her fame. I don't know, maybe she was famous before that as well, but she was very popular. Her music was kind of like the sound of my childhood, among other artists. So whatever, I was sad about her passing, and I had heard that she was in a very abusive relationship, but I didn't know exactly how bad it was. Like, holy crap. I've done a little bit of research. I haven't watched, I know that there was a movie about her life with, I think Angela Bassett. If I remember the actress's name. But I think, she went through really horrible levels of abuse. Like, wow, can I say trauma bonding? And this guy was messed up in the head. And, really unfortunate. And I could probably talk a lot about the things that I've seen in their synastry, even though, unfortunately, his time of birth is not known. But even without having his time of birth, you can see where the darkness comes from, And so this is really kind of a worrisome situation here, because they didn't even have the strong aspects. What they had was the mutual trine. So she had Mars in Aquarius trine his Mars-Venus in... Oh, whoops. Wait. No, I'm not looking at the right situation. No, they had the mutual trine, yes, involving the Pluto. So he had Pluto in Gemini trine her Mars in Aquarius. She had Pluto in Cancer trine Mars, Venus in Scorpio in his chart. And so they had the mutual trine, the double whammy, right? So you would think, again, the trine between Pluto and Mars cannot be that harmful because it's an easy aspect. But that's when you don't take into account the potential psychological effects that it could have on the two people involved. On top of this, they actually have multiple Plutonic connections, like her Pluto square his sun, and also his Pluto opposite her Venus. So there was a strong desire, obviously, on his part to control her. I'm pretty sure they also had the Saturn-Venus conjunction, his Saturn conjunct her Venus, which would have further emphasized this desire to control her sexuality, her beauty, and everything, because Venus is all about, your femininity, your glamour, wealth as well, so maybe controlling her finances, that could also have been a thing. And so there are a lot of these dark themes in their synastry, and this is without even taking into account his ascendant. Maybe there would have been more there. And what I wanted to say also is you can see why in this situation this was a trigger for this person to turn to violence, because he has a Mars-Venus conjunction in Scorpio. And Venus here is not happy whatsoever. It is completely trashed. It is completely dominated by Mars. And this means very weakened, right? And Mars is a very violent sort of energy. I've actually talked about this, that, a lot of people associate Mars-Venus with art and artists. And certainly that's also one interpretation, as it was in the case of Ike Turner as well. But another way to interpret Mars-Venus conjunction is the love of violence, right? Because Venus is love, Mars is violence and aggression and everything that is rough and warfare and all this stuff. And also just sexuality without feelings, really, when you think about it. So that could be one thing. And this is why the Venus-Mars conjunction also shows up in the chart of Hitler. I talked about that in a video ages ago. I don't remember exactly. I think where I talked about Aruda Lagna in Capricorn, but I'm not 100% sure. And so in his horoscope, he has the Mars-Venus conjunction in Scorpio, which means Venus was very weak, very debilitated, totally controlled by Mars. And as far as I have read about their relationship, there were signs with respect to his behavior from early in the relationship that he was really messed up. I think he took her to like a sex club on their honeymoon or something like that. Really gross stuff. And she was mortified, but, she had already gotten married. So, and unfortunately, Tina Turner in her horoscope, and also according to the things that I have read about her, didn't have a strong sense of self-esteem, and she had a lot of placements that showed, fear of abandonment and a lot of hurt in her childhood. So unfortunately, she was, like many women who end up in abusive relationships, the perfect target for someone who is potentially psychopathic, sociopathic, and whatever you want to call it. Someone who's controlling and abusive, basically. But yeah, so these are the examples that I wanted to talk about. As you can see, you can have the lighter end of the spectrum, you can have the worst end of the spectrum with this aspect. It's always important to be cautious with this aspect and see what else is happening in the synastry. What else is happening between Mars and Pluto in the horoscope, and most importantly, what is happening in the individual charts with respect to the individual people's values and tendencies and all that, because that will really shed light on how this aspect will play out, whether it will be healthy and transformative and worth your time, or if it will turn into something quite unhealthy and even potentially abusive, really. And yeah, this is pretty much what I wanted to say. And if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. And please comment in the comment section with anything you would like to share, comment, feedback, anything. And also, if you are interested in a private reading, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. You can check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. And also, if you want to check out the membership options, I will leave a video in the description that gives more details about that. And last but not least, I have my tarot channel, and I will be linking that in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. So if you like tarot, maybe check it out, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. All right, so thank you very much for listening.